Check it out, Joe. Check it out, Joe.
Okay, we're back. I'm Lee Peterson. This is the podcast WDcast. Thanks for jumping back on. Let's get back to our conversation with Toby Barnes. We stopped at the milkman. Let's keep going with that idea. I heard a CEO say that everyone knows that retail is now digital first, but you have kind of a different take on that altogether.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before. I think, and it's interesting because I come from a very digital background. So, like, I've spent my time in digital and kind of coming to retail in a later part of my career. I'm lucky because I'm riding that wave of digitalness. You know, I'm being able to talk to people because I understand the digital side. And I've spoken to people about because consumers have a phone, everyone has a phone in their pocket, and that's how we're communicating with each other. That's how we're doing our shopping now. That's how we're getting our news. That everything needs to be digital first. I think that's missing the point of digital. And I think the digital isn't about screens. It isn't about glass and keyboards and things. It's about what that thing can do for me. So I can live in America and I speak to my mum who's in England, and I now can do that because of the digital connections and the fact it's not as expensive as the old phone systems were. The fact I can get my groceries delivered to my door is enabled through digital. If it wasn't a screen, and voice is a really good way of bringing those in. Is voice digital? Well, because it has computers, like, it gets very esoteric and philosophical around what is and what isn't. And I think it's similarly where we're talking about retail. I think the important part is to really focus on consumer needs and really look at what consumers need to do, what are the jobs to be done, or what are the opportunities you can have with a consumer. And that may come from, that's the way in which digital developments have been done in the past with things like human-centered design and design thinking approaches. It's really about understanding what is the consumer trying to do and how can we deliver that as either as frictionless as possible, or knowing when the times are to add a little bit of friction to get an additional benefit. And so for a retailer, like I say, it's really important to understand what it is the consumer understands and be more consumer centric to enable that. And it may be that digital is a tool that you use to enable that. But in the same way, glass and concrete are tools you use when you build a building. But you wouldn't say that somebody is going to be digital first and concrete second. That just doesn't make sense. Or, in the 1970s, we were concrete first. It doesn't make sense that way. And so I think digital needs to really, it's the power of digital that we really need to harness, not necessarily just digital. And you see brands jumping to that, and they'll put screens and iPads everywhere in the store, and 6 months later, no one's touching them. And I think digital needs to be thought about as the value, not the thing itself.
Yeah, it's an enabler, actually, right? More than anything else. Now, what's funny is, talking about the shopping centers and the cars from however many years ago, not that long ago, actually. That's kind of all that was, really. That's how we got to where we got. But I think that one of the things that happened at that point in time was that most retailers, and myself included, because I worked for them for long periods of time, we got kind of spoiled with the fact that the customer was not ultimately in charge like they are now. We were. Yeah. So if we got the product there, we'd have it for you. Otherwise, the customer just had to go home empty-handed. We weren't even really shipping things to anybody, 25, 30 years ago. We were basically stuffing stores, and you had to be there at the right time. So everything revolved around the merchant. And that, like what you're saying, like getting to the fact that it's about the consumer and what their needs are, I think is what has actually destroyed almost half of retail in the United States. That transition.
It's really interesting you put it like that, because I think you can translate that to media as well. I think traditionally newspapers and even broadcasters, they made the news, they made a thing, and you had to come and get it. Yeah, you had to go and buy the newspaper, and as long as they put the news there, people bought it or tuned in. And it was the digital first companies who said, actually, you don't have to read all the news. Maybe you just want sports. Maybe I just want the weather. Maybe I just want the headlines, or maybe I just want the gossip. I don't care about the economics of Belarus or wherever it is. They thought they changed their approach to say, okay, what is it people want? Breaking audience up into atomic group and giving them, as you say, using digital as an enabler, I think is what has left some of those broadcasters and some of those newspaper media giants behind. I think it's doing the same thing in retail.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's been a transition too. Like you get the New York Times, they're going to charge charge you, and what they had to go through, because you can always figure a way around. Like if I need an article and I'm not a subscriber, you can always figure out a way to get that article. But I think we're sort of in the transition of that as well as we are with physical stores. Like they're trying to figure out where to go because they were so much in demand, or they so much in command.
And I think that subscription model is fascinating, and I think it goes back to something we started this conversation with around community. A lot of people like to buy. New York Times is a great example. You buy the New York Times because on Saturday you get the paper and you have a coffee and you read that. In the UK, we have a paper called The Guardian, which is a kind of left-leaning paper that had a really good mix of, and still has a really good mix of culture as well as the news and independent journalism. And it's as much as being a member of the gang. You know, it's about being in that community. It's like if I'm reading The Guardian, that says who I am. And so I think that they've really shifted and worked that out and said, okay, well, what is our revenue model if we're not selling these pieces of paper anymore? They went for a while of having kind of websites because they were digital first, and of course we'll stick it on the website, and then they realized they weren't making any money because no one was buying anything, and now shifting to subscription models that I subscribe to The Guardian and I don't think I read it very often, and sometimes I feel like, oh, I'm going to cancel this, but I feel like I'm also supporting that. I'm supporting the ability of other people. I feel like that a little bit of that kind of medieval approach of patronism, you know, like I'm a patron of the arts or I'm a patron of the news. I may only pay like, I don't know, $10 a year, whatever, but I'm supporting that because I believe it should happen. It is true. It's like there's a lot of people say, you know, like if everything came completely commercial, you're just never going to get these like actually interesting stories. So it's important, and so people want to be able to support those.
They broke the Edward Snowden stuff too, didn't they? Yeah. Which is, if you read that book, the Snowden book it reads like a spy novel, and every once in a while you have to go, wait, this happened. Another retail question. So how do you like the virtual shopping thing? Like some guy tried to pitch one to us, you know, like I can create this entire 3D store. And it was a lot more sophisticated than the ones, you know, I saw 5 years ago, but you could navigate it. You clicked on a product, it opened up, and then you put it in the box. But it was a store that you navigated through. What do you think of that?
I think it's one of those weird growing pains. I think our grandchildren, or my grandchildren, will probably be VR virtual natives. There will be more kind of virtual environments for them to move around. But on the same time, I'm yet to see that actually start. I don't think it's even started yet. You know, like I'm old. Yeah, VR's been around since the 70s. There's, you know, yes, it's got smaller, and yes, you can run it from your mobile phone, but really still the same. Do you remember a thing called Second Life?
No.
I don't know. Second Life was for a while, it was a huge virtual world. I can't remember that guy's name, but a few people made millions out of it. You could log on through your browser. There was around the same time a film called Lawnmower Man, and this kind of idea of this virtual world where you could come in and anyone could be dressed as anything. So you could be a car or a horse or anything you wanted to be. And many brands built stores. They built malls, and you can come in and you could buy these items. And if you bought the Coca-Cola can will be sent to your house. It's dead now because it was terrible. It's all novelty, and it was like you could go in and go, wow, look, it's a Coke store. And, you know, an architect had built this incredible Coke store. You looked around and were like, that's cool. But then the next day there would be something else cool. And the next day there would be something else cool. It had no real need it was solving. It still involved downloading software. It still involved strapping something on my head. Like all of these things, I feel for quite a few more years, virtual reality will be used in the senses of if you're a doctor and you're operating in those worlds, so you can see inside someone's body, or you're a mechanic and you can see inside the engine. I think consumer virtual reality, other than maybe a few niche games, I think is going to take a long time to really get to a place that feels like it is adding value. I think there's a lot of people trying kind of digital shops where you can navigate around the store and you can move around the store and you can zoom in and zoom out and see the products. I think a lot of those they'll be great fun to play with for a while, but they just won't last. The reason I go to a store is so I can put my phone away. The reason I go to the store is so I can get a beer. The reason I go to the store is so I can talk to other people who are interested in denim as I am. I'm not going to get that experience in a virtual world. So I think they're solving for some problems, but they're not solving for the real problem.
So kind of conversely to that, what do you think about live streaming? I heard the CEO of Alibaba on a podcast recently. He said last year they did $44 billion worth of business through live streaming in China.
It doesn't surprise me, and that's something I'm very strong on at the moment. I think, like I mentioned earlier, it's like seeing a lot of the Chinese platforms are developing really good infrastructure for influencers who already have huge audiences. They have the audience. They have more audience than most of the brands have, and connecting those, going on. There used to be before pandemic like shopping safaris that you could follow along and you could buy products. Again, tying back to an earlier conversation, I think if you can put technology and connect technology that connects a consumer with an in-store athlete, I think suddenly you've got huge new connections. There's a vendor called Hero, and Hero are doing some really interesting, they've done interesting work where they are using video platforms to connect the in-store athletes with people at home. And so you have a live call or a connection or a video call or a Zoom call with the in-store athlete, and they're in the store themselves. They can go and get products and show you product, and you can purchase them, and then they get delivered to your home, which is a step up from the just browsing a wall. I think they're going to be very, very, the people who can get that right is going to be very successful. I think the reason they haven't been so successful is it crosses over 3 or 4 silos within brands, which are difficult to break. You need the in-store teams to be talking to the digital platform teams, to be connected to the logistics teams, and you need to be okay with maybe that your message is going to be shared by the in-store athlete rather than the big brand director at the top. So that's like at least 4 silos that don't normally necessarily talk very well together, and they need to be super agile and invest very small to start with. Again, so you can see why everyone's excited by it, but no one's really been able to deliver it yet. And the first brands and retailers to crack that, I think, is are really going to show huge success.
Yeah, you're right. It reminds me of restaurants. With a restaurant, I thought about restaurant business a lot because we work with restaurants, but that's a difficult proposition, right? Because you could be offended by the person that greets you. You could be offended by the atmosphere. You could be offended by the food. You could be offended by the table, the wait staff. I mean, there's so much that could go wrong. And it feels like that's a little bit similar. There's way too much. You could just look at that and go, I don't like the person that's showing me that. Or, even if it is a Nike athlete, you could just say, I don't like that guy. That guy's got a big ego. And then there it goes out the window.
I think there's going to be a coming together of the platforms like TikTok that are just insanely popular now with the Gen Z. And there are people who are learning how to edit, how to work on camera, how to create presence so much better than any other generation has done. And I think this generation just knows they're the first generation that have all the tools at their fingertips. They know how to edit, they know how to add music, they know how to do all these other things. And so if a brand can somehow enable that, it's not about capturing that or owning that, but if a brand can enable that and maybe teach people while selling shoes, I think that's going to be incredibly powerful.
But it still goes back to what you were talking about with retail being sort of blown to bits, right? Tiny little nuggets, and that's just another one. So we talked about Nike, we talked about Rafa, talked about Yeti. Anybody else out there you think is doing a really good job?
When everyone asks me, one I sometimes think about it now is like, which are the stores that I want to go back to? I am desperate to go back to a bar. Live music, I go to a lot of gigs and I haven't seen live music in a year, and it pains me. But then I think about, what are the stores that I really like? And one which I have always loved, and anytime I've been visiting a city, go and investigate, is Aesop. Aesop is a skincare beauty, but it doesn't feel like necessarily a beauty brand. They're originally from Australia. I think they're in most cities now. But from a retail design point of view, they've done an incredible job mixing a very strong brand aesthetic. It looks very utilitarian. It's very bold design, but they mix that with whatever community they are a part of. So when they were in, for example, the Portland store, they're in the Pearl, and they brought some of the old history of the cobbles on the floor and pulled those into the space. The New York space feels very dark and has a lot of the wood that was around the area that they had in the past. So they really bring together the community in a very subtle way, but marry that with this beautiful aesthetic of their own. And then on top of that, they have a number of rituals that I don't see many other brands kind of doing such a good job of. Like every time you go, they usually offered a cup of tea, like a green tea. The store associates always, once they finish the transaction, will come around the cash wrap and give you the receipt, by hand. And so it just feels like for those 5 minutes, I might be going in there to get a shampoo or a deodorant or a moisturizer or something. For those 5 minutes, I feel like I'm transported away from whatever my normal life into this spa-like environment, beautiful to look at, beautiful to enjoy. I still think that having that really strong brand message is a reason to go in there. And it's, to your point about Rafa, it's like, it's an experience in itself. And I'm looking forward to going back and rebuying a moisturizer that I probably should spend too much money on.
So what do you think about social media, like in general? Is this the worst thing that ever happened to humanity, or the best thing?
I think there are many things, I think, that if we had thought about things further, that we probably wouldn't have done the same way. And even as a parent, the biggest challenge of with kids is getting off screens. It's true of every parent, and everyone is like, they're on screens too much. And they're on screens because most of the social platforms are built around the traditional casino-like loops of attention grabbing. And their business. And so they're building these attention loops. They're, notifications or real-time conversation rather than just sending an email or a letter and waiting for it to come back. And that's in their business to keep your eyes glued to the screen. And as a parent, you're trying to fight that, and you're trying to get them off and away from that and have a balanced lifestyle. So I think you'll see more effort put into, and you see Apple already starting to put into things like screen time notifications and so on. I think social media the mechanics of social media are unhealthy. The social media itself isn't unhealthy. It's the mechanics and the businesses around it that are driving more people to use it all the time that are unhealthy. So I think if everyone had time to do it again and there was more time to put more restrictions in place, I think they probably would do. I also think these are all tools, and I think I'm old enough to remember like very early internet. The early internet felt like, if I felt like a library, that you had access to all this knowledge that you couldn't find before, which nerdy role-playing person, it was incredible. And it also had this, felt a bit like an art gallery, playground, community space that I could communicate with people. I could chat to people being based in the UK. I could talk to people on the west coast of California about role-playing. Like the opportunity to do that was amazing. When people started making money out of it, I think that generally is when things go wrong. Whether it's like music, the arts, like the internet in general. I think when it started becoming a mall, that's when like the darker forces start coming in. I think that when things start becoming about, we're going to make money out of your kids or about your eyeballs, it's suddenly like, that doesn't sound right.
Right. Well, I think social media caught us in a period of deregulation. Like basically our political stance was from Reaganomics, when we were going to deregulate everything. That we didn't need to regulate this. We don't need regulations for that. Texas just kind of caught up with that now. And so I think the business models of the social media platforms really sort of took advantage of that. Well, we can do whatever the hell we want. Let's do this.
I think the other thing, that's interesting, because I think the other thing as well is around individualism. There was around that same time of the sort of Reaganism, and in China was the same, Europe was the same, was a real push for the power of individualism. And that kind of explosion after the 60s and 70s kind of counterculture and so on through into the 80s was this, anyone can be famous, anyone can be a millionaire, anyone can do that things. And it was the power of the individual sort of fueled that social media side.
It seems that social media has had the power to change a lot, in a pretty short period of time. Yeah. Okay, so just a couple of softball questions, and I think we got to get going here. But what do you think is going to happen in 21? Crystal ball.
I think this year... I think this year is the pandemic is going to continue longer than we think it's going to continue. I think this year is going to be a very slow start. I mean, it's going to be great, and we're seeing great starts to people coming back to work or stores starting to open up again. But I think it's going to be a very slow. Someone described it as a hammer and dance, and they were going to do this, start and come out and do the dance. The numbers will go up, the hammer will come down, will close again, and then it will slowly go back. And so I think it's this gradual thing. So I think things, you will see positivity. I think this is going to be a year of optimism and positivity. But I also think it's a chance for people to reevaluate what they're doing, strategize where they need to get in the future, and really kind of focus on next year as actually putting those plans in place.
Yeah, I can feel a lot of optimism already. But we've had a tough winter here to the middle of the country, and that hasn't helped. We're waiting for a nice day to be a little more optimistic, I think. So this one that really is a softball question. Like, what do you do personally? What do you do in your spare time?
A spare time. Now there's a concept I haven't seen for a while.
Yeah.
I remember with spare time. I think for me, one of the things that's always been really important to me and continues to be is music. I used to go to a lot of gigs. I've always been, or concerts and things. Used to go to a lot of clubs, which is a weird thing to do as a man with grey hair these days, but like age has changed somewhat. So I still think it's important to be involved in that scene. I DJ, so I've been, since lockdown, I've been kind of producing, doing a little bit of broadcasting of the things with the technology now, so that's been fun. Music is really kind of a real passion of mine and has been so important to keep me connected through the pandemic. We've had some virtual festivals which have been fun to bring those kind of communities together. I think that's really that and the outdoors, being in Portland.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I've still been able to do, still been able to go for hikes and get to the coast. And so I think the two most important things, after family and work, has been music and the outdoors, really.
Okay. So thank you, Toby. You've been extremely gracious. I appreciate it. It was a good conversation. Have it anytime with you, by the way. Much appreciated for making WDcast better. Good luck. And here's to a great 21 filled with a lot of optimism.
Thank you, Lee. It's always good to chat with you, and it's good fun conversation. So I really appreciate it. So speak to you soon.
Well, one day we're going to change the world, man.
Absolutely. Take it easy, Lee.
Okay, you too. People, be
Bye-bye.
sure and listen to WDcast as we prod more valuable and extremely interesting people and information out of people like Toby. And also be sure and subscribe to this podcast, which is at WDpartners.com. You go to the podcast icon on the bottom of the page in the permanav. We will have CEOs on there. We have entrepreneurs, all great learning, including people like Toby. So thanks for listening. Stay safe. And remember that the first rule of leadership is it's always your fault. So take care, everybody.
Check it out, George.